If you didn't know it by now, I love gadgets and the latest technology, and that's why I am very excited that this week we have gotten our hands on the all-new second-generation Honda Clarity, and this, of course, is the one that's powered by hydrogen. Now, the first-generation Clarity was powered only by Honda's in-house developed hydrogen fuel cell, but the second-generation Clarity has the choice of 3 different drivetrains. We have the hydrogen fuel cell that we're driving right here, but there's also a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle and, of course, a full battery electric option. In this video, we're going to be talking just about the hydrogen fuel cell Clarity, but we will get our hands on the electric and the plug-in hybrid vehicle very soon. Before we go on, let's talk a little bit about hydrogen fuel cells and how they fit into the landscape. There seems to be a little bit of confusion about what hydrogen fuel cell technology means to you as a consumer. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this video. If you want me to take a deeper dive, let me know down there in the comment section below. Perhaps we'll create a second video where we take a deeper dive into hydrogen technology. Hydrogen fuel cells can sound a little bit scary to some people or a little bit outlandish to others, but perhaps the best way to think about hydrogen fuel cell car like the Clarity is that this is just a different kind of battery, because the Clarity really is an electric vehicle with a hydrogen power plant. That means that in terms of making this vehicle go forward, this is almost identical to the Clarity Electric. Power levels are, of course, a little bit different, but the biggest difference is what is supplying the power to the electric motors. This vehicle has a small lithium-ion battery pack and a hydrogen fuel cell, whereas the Clarity Electric has a big battery pack. Now, why would you want a hydrogen fuel cell instead of a battery pack? Well, it's all about weight and range, because if we take a look at the Clarity Electric, we have an excellent comparison. It weighs 4,024 pounds, it has a range of 89 miles, and it will take 3.1 hours to charge completely from empty to full at 240 volts. You could go to a fast charge station, get about 70 miles or so with a 30-minute DC fast charge. But this hydrogen fuel cell car right here weighs 140 pounds more, which is not a huge difference. We get a slight reduction in cargo area, about 2.5 cubic feet less cargo area in the back, but we get 366 miles of range. That's enough to take you from San Jose to Los Angeles quite comfortably. And unlike a battery electric vehicle that could take over an hour to charge even at the fastest rates available, this will take only 10 minutes to give you another 366 miles of range. At this point, you're probably thinking, what about the Tesla with the 100 kilowatt hour battery pack? Well, it still will not have the same amount of range as the Clarity hydrogen vehicle. It's not going to fill as quickly, and it is considerably heavier. Because if you were to add a battery pack to the Clarity in order to give it 366 miles of electric range, you would be adding between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds to this vehicle in order to get a battery that would take you this far. That's all thanks to the hydrogen fuel cell under the hood, because there is way more energy in a kilogram of hydrogen than in a kilogram of battery pack. The Honda Clarity's fuel tanks hold just 5 kilograms of hydrogen, but those 5 kilograms of hydrogen contain more than double the raw energy potential that we see in the Tesla Model S P100D's battery pack. And that P100D's battery pack doesn't weigh 5 kilograms, it weighs over 600 kilograms. When it comes to lightweight construction, longer driving ranges, and faster fill-ups, hydrogen fuel cell technology definitely seems to have the upper hand, and that's exactly why Honda, General Motors, and a number of other companies, including the state of California, are really investing in this technology. Hydrogen vehicles and hydrogen infrastructure are a little bit of a chicken and egg problem, of course. We have only 3 hydrogen vehicles available in the United States, and they're only available in California. We have this new second-generation Clarity, we have the Toyota Mirai, which I also have a review on, and then, of course, we have a previous generation Hyundai crossover. In California, there are, of course, tens of thousands of gas stations, thousands and thousands of electric vehicle charging stations, but less than 100 hydrogen filling stations at this point in time. By happenstance, my office in San Jose is right next to a hydrogen filling station, so for me, driving a Clarity really would be no different than driving another gasoline vehicle. I would just fill it at work instead of filling it near home. However, if you don't live or work near a hydrogen filling station, then integrating a hydrogen car into your life could be a little bit tricky. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the car itself. The first generation Clarity really did look like a concept car, but this generation of the Clarity looks very much like the rest of Honda's car lineup. We have a little bit of Civic going on, a little bit of 2018 Honda Accord as well. The Clarity fuel cell comes in only one trim level, which is fully loaded. So we have full LED headlights, high beams and low beams. The turn signals are right up here in this area above this large chrome bar that goes across the front. And then we have these LED accent strips on each side. If you're looking at the front of the Clarity and you think to yourself, this looks like a large vehicle, then you're right. This is actually a little bit wider than the 2018 Honda Accord in America. Because of the sort of wedge shape that we have going on up front, you can see the turn signal from the side as well. In terms of overall length, this comes in at 193.5 inches long. According to Honda's latest spec sheet, that is 1.2 inches longer than the electric or the plug-in hybrid versions of the Clarity. That's also about 1 inch longer than the Toyota Mirai and right about the same length as the 2018 Honda Accord. But you'll notice something a little bit different than the Accord going on right back here, because this has sort of a lift-back-like profile, even though this is actually a sedan with a separate trunk. The side profile out back is somewhat reminiscent of the Honda Accord Cross Tour with a slightly higher rear end. That gives us more headroom in the back, and it also allows us to have a larger trunk than a more traditionally sized sedan would. Of course, keep in mind that the hydrogen fuel tank is located in the back of the vehicle, and that does cut down cargo capacity versus the plug-in version of the Clarity. Back here, you'll also notice a few aerodynamic treatments. We have a small wheel skirt right here above the rear wheel. It's not a full one that covers the wheel completely. And we actually have some functional vents integrated into the rear door that help direct the airflow around the rear wheel. The rear end styling is again a little bit of a cross between the Accord and the Civic. We have tail lamp modules that wrap from the body on over to the trunk lid, and you don't find any visible exhaust tips because, of course, fuel cell stacks don't exhaust the same way that gasoline engines do. The exhaust is much cooler, and it's actually positioned a little bit further under the vehicle. Zooming into the trunk lid, you'll notice that we have a section here that's an awful lot more reflective than the rest of the trunk lid. That's because this is actually a glass window, but it actually has a defogger grid inside, and you can view through this using the rearview mirror. Very much like a Toyota Prius, you'll actually be looking sort of through this as well as through the glass up above it. But remember, I said this has a trunk. It's not a hatchback or a liftback, so we actually have a parcel shelf and a small glass window right here inside the vehicle that allows you to see through that last glass window integrated into the trunk lid. Early on, hydrogen fuel cells were quite large, but they have been able to miniaturize the one in the second generation Clarity, so it now fits entirely under the hood. And according to Honda, the entire drivetrain package up front is about the same size as their 3.5-liter V6 engine and a standard automatic transmission. That allows them to put this under the vehicle without really messing with the rest of the body. Somewhere deep under this cover is where the magic in this vehicle happens. A hydrogen fuel cell does not burn hydrogen per se. Things start out with a catalyst-style reaction, which strips electrons off of the hydrogen. Then the protons pass through a polymer electrolyte membrane and combine with the oxygen on the other side, and that process is what produces the electricity. There's a stream of hydrogen going on one side of the membrane, and then regular air, which contains oxygen, logically, on the other side of the membrane, and then out of the exhaust comes water vapor, because when you combust or otherwise catalyze oxygen and hydrogen, you get water. Speaking in terms of horsepower, because it's a little bit easier for most people to understand, the fuel cell stack produces about 138 horsepower's worth of electricity, and that feeds a 174 horsepower electric motor and a 1.7 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery pack. The lithium-ion battery pack acts as sort of a ballast because fuel cells don't ramp from zero electricity production to 100% electricity production or back down again that rapidly. So the lithium-ion battery pack provides the delta when you want to accelerate quickly, and then it sucks up the delta when you stop accelerating and you pull your foot off the accelerator pedal, and the fuel cell stack is still producing electricity. Located in the back of the Clarity, there are two hydrogen tanks that hold hydrogen at about 10,000 psi. There's one large one behind the rear seat and one small one under the rear seat. Those two tanks combined give this vehicle a range of about 366 miles, which is 54 miles longer than a Toyota Mirai and a decent amount longer than any other electric vehicle in America. Front seat comfort is good in the Clarity, but I have to drop this just a little bit below the new 2018 Honda Accord because we don't have any adjustable lumbar support available. Still, Honda has a history of making very comfortable front seats, and that continues for the Clarity. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion. Some of the specifications on the fuel cell Clarity are a little bit difficult to decipher versus the plug-in Clarity, but it appears that we actually have a little bit less headroom up front and in the back versus the plug-in hybrid model. That is logical because the battery pack is under the front seats in this vehicle. That said, front seat headroom and legroom is very generous because the Clarity is a mid-size sedan. This is not a compact vehicle like a Toyota Prius, so you definitely have the same kind of room, the same kind of width, and expansive feeling in this cabin that we see, for instance, in the Honda Accord. And sitting upright in this seat, I still have about 1.5 to 2 inches of headroom left. The mid-size nature of the Clarity is obvious when we hop into the back seat. I have about 4 or 5 inches of legroom left here. There's also an interesting little pocket right here where you can stick your cell phone right in the back of the front seats in addition to the regular storage pocket. Now, if I were to sit very upright in this back seat, my head barely brushes the ceiling, and that again seems to be a little bit of a difference between this and the plug-in Clarity. But if I move over to the middle seat, you'll definitely notice that this is still a mid-size sedan, because you could fit 3 adults back here if you needed to. And because of the overall shape of the Clarity, I actually seem to have a little bit more headroom in the middle seat, even though it is higher off the ground than the outboard seats. Scooting all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, this front seat's all the way back in its track, suitable for a 6'5" passenger. I have about 3 inches of legroom left, and definitely a lot of footwell room. Now, the middle seat that I just vacated is one of the big differences between this and the Mirai, because the Mirai is a 4-seat vehicle and the Clarity seats 5. We also have a fold-down center armrest that's softly padded, and it has built-in cup holders. One thing that you won't find back here that you do find in your average family sedan would be a folding rear seat back, and that means that cargo practicality is going to fall a little bit behind your average family sedan. Because the larger hydrogen tank is located sort of here in the vehicle, the cargo area does shrink versus the plug-in hybrid Clarity. It goes from 15.5 cubic feet down to 11.4. 11.4 is right in the same range as many first-generation mid-size hybrid sedans. Of course, those hybrid mid-size sedans have really come a long way, and the 2018 Accord Hybrid has more cargo space than any version of the Clarity at 16.7 cubic feet. Still, this cargo area surprised me a little bit because I thought that you would only be able to fit 2 24-inch roller bags back here. We were actually able to fit 4, and this cargo area is quite deep. As you can see, this is a 22-inch roller bag. This is carry-on sized in a domestic flight, and you can actually line up 3 of them upright in that position and still very easily close the cargo lid. Going in for a closer look, you can see this structure that protects the hydrogen tanks. Then we have a small storage area right there underneath the load floor. As you might have guessed, there's no spare tire, but we do have a tire inflator kit built into the side of the trunk. Moving inside the cabin, we find height-adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger, and 2-way adjustable headrests. The leather seats feature perforated inserts in the center section and in the seat bottom cushion. Although these seats are just heated, they're not ventilated. You'll find soft touch injection molded plastics on the upper section of the door panel. This middle section right here with the stitching is actually faux suede. It's an Alcantara style fabric. And then we find stitched pleather around the armrest. The trim in the Clarity is quite interesting because this imitates open pore wood trim, while in theory being more environmentally friendly. The overall design of the dashboard is a little bit different than Honda's other sedans in America. We have an upper tier, which houses these 2 air vents, and then we have a middle tier with, again, more of this suede fabric. They're separated by that imitation wood trim, and then we have a touchscreen infotainment and navigation system with the same software that's running in a number of other Honda vehicles. On the passenger side of the dashboard, we have a large bin-style glove compartment, easily able to accommodate large tablet computers. As you can see, the infotainment system is running Honda's latest software, which features Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration. We also have factory navigation standard in the Clarity fuel cell. Below the infotainment screen, we find the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control and the heated front seats. Below the climate controls, we find the vehicle's shifter. This is a button-style shifter, very similar to what we see in certain Acura models. Reverse is a slightly different button to the park, neutral, and drive buttons, which are up-facing. There's also a sport button right in front of everything. Moving out from there, we find more of that open pore imitation wood trim, electric parking brake, automatic brake hold, and then there's a storage area under this where you'll find your USB inputs, and that's where you can easily put smartphones or other large devices. This storage area is also where we find 2 USB inputs and an auxiliary 12-volt power port. Between the front seats, we find 2 very large cup holders, a definite hallmark of modern Honda products, a softly padded center armrest, and a moderately sized storage area. I have a wallet in there for size reference. The instrument cluster features a partial LCD design. This little sport logo, the transmission mode indicator, park or drive, these are part of the LCD, as is everything right here in this semicircle. To the right of the semicircle, we have the status of the radar adaptive cruise control system. This is also an LCD element. As you drive the vehicle, this needle gives you a power readout from essentially 0 over here to 100% on the right side, and then regenerative braking down here below that line. There's a digital speedometer in the middle, and then we have our typical trip computer information. You can also use this screen to change your input source, choosing between Sirius XM, Apple CarPlay, etc. And in an interesting touch, there really aren't very many dedicated hydrogen fuel cell screens. If we scroll all the way over past all those, we have one right here which gives you this blue dot in the middle that grows larger as the fuel cell is creating more power and shrinks when the fuel cell is creating less power. On the right side of the instrument cluster, there's a fuel gauge for the hydrogen tanks. And then on the left side, a battery charge gauge for that battery that acts as a system ballast. The steering wheel design is similar to other Honda models. We have some small sport grips up top, and it is a 3-spoke design with more of that trim right there in that center section. On the left side of the wheel, we find the controls for the infotainment system, as well as that multifunction LCD. This button right here changes between the various functions in that LCD. You can then click enter or scroll side to side using these buttons. When you're not in one of those menus, these function as track forward, backward, and source change buttons. We then have a volume toggle that also features a touchpad where you can slide your finger across it like we saw in certain generations of the Honda Civic. Below that, we have dedicated phone buttons and a voice command button. On the right side of the wheel, we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control and the lane keeping assistance system. The first thing you'll notice about the Clarity when you start driving one is that this does make a few unusual noises compared to a traditional gasoline vehicle, a hybrid car, or a regular battery electric car. We do of course get a little bit of motor whine like you would find in a battery electric vehicle, but you can also vaguely hear the hydrogen fuel cell stack in operation. There are occasionally a few clicks, a few little hissing noises that you won't find in a regular car, but everything is very, very well muted. In fact, there's a huge difference between this and the Toyota Mirai in terms of the amount of noise you can hear from the fuel cell stack while the vehicle's in operation. In the Toyota Mirai, under acceleration, sometimes it sounds sort of like there is a hairdryer somewhere under the dashboard, but that doesn't happen in the Clarity. Part of that has to do with the overall design of the fuel cell stack, and part of it actually has to do with its location as well, being under the hood, so you can have a little bit more sound deadening between the fuel cell stack and the cabin. In terms of overall acceleration, this model ran from 0 to 60 in 8 seconds, which means this is right about the same as a Chevy Malibu hybrid. It's about a half second below something like a Toyota Camry hybrid, and about 1 second below the Honda Accord hybrid. Comparisons are a little bit tricky, of course, with the Clarity. You might want to compare this to a mid-size hybrid sedan or a mid-size plug-in hybrid sedan or a battery electric vehicle. And in the battery electric vehicle category, this is going to be a little bit faster than many of the mainstream options. In our braking test, stopping from 60 miles an hour back to 0, this vehicle took 124 feet, which puts this right in the middle of the pack for mainstream entry-level mid-size sedans. It also is in just about the same range as most of the mid-size hybrid vehicles. This is notably shorter than the Toyota Mirai, likely thanks to the wider tires that we have on this vehicle. Again, this weighs about 4,000 pounds. This is going to be about 600 pounds heavier than a 4-cylinder Honda Accord, but we do get 235 width tires on this vehicle, and a mainstream model of the Honda Accord would have much narrower tires. That helps compensate for the added weight. I've seen a few reviews out there that indicated that the Toyota Mirai stopped shorter, but in our tests it took a decent amount longer to stop from 60 miles an hour. The Mirai is actually about the same curb weight as this, but it has much narrower tires. The wide tires that we find on the Clarity really help when it comes to the handling score, and I'm going to give this a B+, whether you're going to compare this to a mainstream battery electric vehicle or a mainstream hybrid. Again, this is about 600 pounds heavier than a 4-cylinder Honda Accord, and you will notice it if you really start pushing this in corners. The rear end of the vehicle especially tends to push out a little bit more than we find in Honda's average mid-size sedan, but this is overall very well composed and definitely more engaging than the Toyota Mirai. This is also actually more engaging when you really start pushing it hard than a variety of pure electric vehicles. However, there's no disguising the overall weight of the Clarity or the fact that the suspension is tuned to deliver a soft and comfortable highway ride. And that's why I would rank the current versions of the Camry hybrid or the Accord hybrid above this when it comes to overall handling ability. On rougher gravel roads like we're on right now, the Clarity delivers a very polished ride. That's not too surprising, of course, because it's pretty typical for heavier vehicles like the Clarity to give a little bit of a better ride than some of the lighter options. And the curb weight on this is again just over 4,000 pounds. So this weighs about as much as some full-size sedans, even though it's sort of in a mid-size sedan package. But again, this is not as heavy as it would be if they needed to put batteries to give you the 366-mile range instead of the hydrogen system. In terms of overall comparisons, this ride feels a little bit more polished than the Toyota Mirai, and I would say it also feels a little bit more compliant than the current generation Honda Accord. Haven't had too much time in the modern Honda Accord, but we do expect to have that for a full week in January, so stay tuned for that model. Back out on a paved road, that balance between handling and a soft ride is obvious. We do feel some of the smaller imperfections on the road surface, but we don't get a great deal of body roll like we find in some very soft vehicles. In our cabin noise test, we came in at 68 decibels at 50 miles an hour, which makes this pretty much equal to the Toyota Mirai. This is much quieter than a mainstream EV in America. It's also much quieter than the average mid-size family sedan in America. Now again, because we are driving a fuel cell vehicle, there are a few unusual noises coming from under the hood, like if I floored it right there, you can hear a little bit of a whooshing sound under there. But overall, this is a little bit quieter than the Toyota Mirai in terms of those fuel cell specific noises. Now we need to talk about fuel economy, which is one of the trickier conversations to have. The EPA gives this vehicle a rating in miles per gallon equivalent, which I don't think is terribly handy, just like I don't think miles per gallon equivalent is the best way of rating a battery electric vehicle. But on that scale, this will score between 65, 68 miles per gallon, depending on exactly how you're driving it, the terrain involved, etc. That number sounds very impressive if you were to compare this to the average family sedan in America, but comparing this to the average EV in America, you'll notice that they will score right around 100 or above. Part of that is because fuel cells are, of course, not 100% efficient. So hydrogen may have greater energy density than the average lithium-ion battery pack, but you do have to convert that energy density from its chemical form in the hydrogen into an electric form that the motor can actually use. And that conversion is not going to be 100% efficient. The other reason that fuel economy is tricky is because we get that Mpge score, but you don't buy hydrogen in miles per gallon equivalents. You buy hydrogen in kilograms. It's one of the only metric ways you can buy fuel in America. And that fuel costs about $13 per kilogram the last time I filled this vehicle. There's a pretty broad range in California based on where the hydrogen is coming from, whether it's a petrochemical byproduct or whether they're trying to crack water and get hydrogen and oxygen as a result. That means that a fuel up in this vehicle is going to cost you right around $65 if you were to actually pay for that fill up. Based on the broad range of hydrogen prices that I have seen, that fill-up could cost you as little as $50 or as much as $80, depending on where in California you are. Now, if you were driving a 30 mile per gallon mid-size hybrid sedan, then you would be paying a lot less to fill up that vehicle and go the same distance. It'd be right around $37 to cover 366 miles. If you could find a battery electric vehicle that could actually go 366 miles on a charge, the cost would be between $36 and $56, depending on exactly where you're filling up the car and the cost of your electricity. If at this point you're thinking, why would I want a hydrogen car if it's going to be a little bit more expensive to fill up? Well, the reality is that it's more expensive for me to fill up because I actually had to pay for the hydrogen that I put in this vehicle. If you were to actually lease one from Honda, then they give you a gas card that has $15,000 on it that you can use at hydrogen filling stations, and that's good for about 80,000 miles of driving. And that means that if you were to lease one of these from Honda, you actually wouldn't be paying for the hydrogen at all. Honda's Clarity fuel cell really is the proof that hydrogen fuel cell vehicles have what it takes to make it into mainstream motoring. This drives just like any other electric vehicle. It feels like an electric vehicle out on the road. It has a very quiet, very comfortable cabin, a reasonable cargo area in the back, and a very, very comfortable interior. There's really nothing about the Clarity that feels unusual or feels weird or in a way feels that unique necessarily compared to an electric vehicle, other than the fact that this electric vehicle gets its power from hydrogen. That feeling of normalcy seems to be the holy grail of alternative fueled vehicles. Electric cars have come a long way in this respect. We now have longer range vehicles like the Chevy Bolt or modern Tesla models that have ranges approximating some gasoline-powered electric vehicles. But this hydrogen fuel cell vehicle actually has a range that is right in the realm of a mid-size family sedan at 366 miles. And more importantly, filling this vehicle is a very gasoline-like filling experience. That means that aside from the obviously valid concerns about a lack of infrastructure, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles like this are very, very easy to integrate into your daily life because you don't have to change the way you do anything as long as you are near a hydrogen fueling station in order to live with the Clarity. You don't have to plug the Clarity in, you don't have to install a home charging station, and you don't have to worry about charging the Clarity for long periods of time. For instance, I recently drove my electric vehicle to the airport, knowing full well that by the time I got to the airport, I would only have about 7% of the battery left. And that meant that when I got back from my business trip and I really just wanted to go home and go to bed, I had to go to a fast charge station and spend 30 minutes shopping at the grocery store and wait for the car to get enough charge so that I could actually get back home. That wouldn't happen in the Clarity, because in the Clarity you would just stop at the hydrogen station just like you would fill any car with gasoline. 5 minutes later, the car's full and you're driving home. If thanks to our masterful videoing skills here at Alexson Autos, you have decided that the Clarity is the right vehicle for you, there are a few things you should know. First up, if you don't live in California, you will need to move to California in order to lease one of these. The other thing you need to know is that this is available only via a lease program. You cannot actually buy a Clarity. There are a variety of different reasons why Honda wants to lease the Clarity instead of letting people buy the Clarity. But on the consumer side, I'm not really sure why you'd want to buy one at the moment anyway, because the lease rate is very, very inexpensive. You can get this model for $369 a month with about $2,800 down. Unlike typical leases, which limit you to perhaps 10 or 12,000 miles a year, this lease will give you 20,000 miles a year. And Honda is throwing in $15,000 worth of hydrogen. That's enough hydrogen to take you about 80,000 miles, depending on exactly how much hydrogen costs in your area. They're also tossing in 21 days of Avis rental cars in case you want to drive somewhere where you can't find hydrogen. So if you want to take a 2-week road trip across the US, for instance, you could rent a car from Avis, you could leave your hydrogen car at home, not worry about where you'd need to fill it up. And because you obviously live in California, because that's the only way to get the Clarity, you may be eligible for a $5,000 state rebate. As I said before, the Toyota Mirai is really the only direct competitor to the Clarity. It'll set you back $57,500 if you want to buy one, and Toyota will actually sell it to you, or you could lease one for $349 a month and $2,500 down. That is a little bit less expensive than the Clarity, but you're of course getting less car. The range is shorter, 312 miles versus 366. It seats 4 instead of seating 5. The cargo area in the back is not quite as accommodating, and the interior is not quite as comfortable either. And of course, the lease is only giving you 12,000 miles a year, not 20,000 miles a year like we find on the Clarity. So if you really want to drive your hydrogen car a great deal, the Clarity is going to be the better option. The Clarity is also just the better car all the way around. That shouldn't be too surprising, of course, because the Mirai has been around for a while and the Clarity is an all-new vehicle, and it's also the second generation of the Clarity. So Honda has been able to work on some of the things that customers didn't like about the first generation model. The Clarity is also pretty interesting from a technology standpoint because they were able to shrink that fuel cell to the point where it can actually fit completely under the hood, giving us a much more practical cargo area and a large and comfortable passenger compartment. I realize this is really whittling things down, but if you live in California, you're looking for an alternative fueled vehicle, you live within or work within range of a hydrogen filling station, and you aren't looking for a crossover vehicle, then definitely put the Clarity fuel cell on your shopping list. Because I happen to work right next to a hydrogen filling station, the Clarity is very, very attractive for my demographic. This would be less expensive overall to operate and more versatile to operate than most mainstream battery electric vehicles in the US. Something like a Hyundai Ioniq Electric might be a little bit less expensive because of their lease program, but we get a larger mileage allowance out of this, and all the fuel ends up being free. It's also worth noting that if you're looking at carpool lane access in California as one of the reasons to buy or lease an alternative fueled vehicle, hydrogen vehicles like the Clarity are likely going to keep their stickers longer than plug-in hybrids or battery electric vehicles because there are simply fewer of them in the state. Plug-in hybrid vehicles are likely going to be the ones first kicked out of the program. I would bet that battery electric vehicles would be next some years down the road, and then probably sometime after that, hydrogen vehicles if they ever get sold in large numbers. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, this has been the all-new Honda Clarity fuel cell. Be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. Head over to patreon.com if you want to support this channel, and I hope you do. You can also head over to facebook.com/AlexandAutos and see what we're driving this week. I'll see you next week.